Okay, I'll just get going. Hello and welcome to Required Reading, the podcast that revisits the most impactful books from our childhood. I'm your host, Erin Bowles. I'm a writer, actor, and hula hoop champion. Our guest today is my dear friend, my pseudo sibling, Brandon Ginchereau. He is a Florida man who escaped Florida, a geeky writer at heart, and is currently an associate producer at All in Film with a few unannounced little films coming out in the next year. Hi, Brandon.
Hello, Aaron. Hula hoop champion?
Yes. So I am trying to like do a fun little thing of like writer, actor, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking like, what is this one? What is this one? And because like the book has a summer camp, I decided we'll do when I 2 years in a row briefly went to a Quaker Harry Potter camp. Yeah. And I was hula hoop champion one summer. They didn't do it the other summer. It's not like I got beat.
So you're undefeated.
I am undefeated. The one time it happened, yes. Our book today is The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan from 2005. 2005, setting the scene. YouTube is launched. China ratifies an anti secession law aimed at preventing Taiwan from declaring independence. Charles, the current King of England but former Prince of Wales, marries Camilla Parker Bowles. Hurricane Katrina kills over 1,000 people. The Xbox 360 is released, and top films include Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, Harry Potter Goblet of Fire, War of the Worlds, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Wedding Crashers.
It was a stacked year.
A lot going on. So, Rick Riordan is from Texas. He was a teacher for 15 years, teaching English and social studies. And when he was in college, he worked 3 years as a music director at a summer camp. He almost every year taught mythology and always loved it. Noticed like students were really responsive to it. He wrote a series of like adult mystery novels when he was a teacher and conceived of the idea for this book as bedtime stories. His firstborn son, Haley, who was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, which I thought was really nice. Like, if you don't see a representation you want, let's make it up.
Oh,
I really like that. But
100%.
what is your story with this book? How did this
Oh
enter
my
your
gosh.
life?
So I also looked up what year it came out, but I would have told you it was like 2007, 2008. I was a wee lad in
Yeah.
2005. I was what, like 7, 8 maybe. I definitely didn't start reading this until middle school.
Mhm.
But this book for me, I 100% have ADHD, and that's probably going to come across in this podcast. But like the idea of like, oh, you're ADHD, you can't focus, like everything feels like slightly off. Maybe you have a bigger calling. Maybe
Mhm.
you're a demigod. Maybe there's like a whole group of people out there who you can relate to, and they're all, relating over the same thing. That like really stuck out to me growing up. And I love history. So like the Greek mythology aspect pulled me in, and I, still read all the books as they're still coming out with new ones. But yeah, that's how I first got into it. I think sixth grade year, it was like one of the options for required reading, and I'm like, this doesn't sound bad. Required reading.
Yeah. Ah.
But ooh, shout out. Yeah, to me, it really was that it created a fun environment to where, like, as an outsider myself for a lot of time growing up, it felt like this was my niche. Like, these were my people. And you really put yourself into that.
Yeah. I really liked in the first page, they set up the direct address of like, you think it's fiction, but it's reality. You might be one of us. I think like that's the appeal of other series at this time, like Harry Potter and things like that. And I like that like, he fully went into it. Like, it's not even subtext, it is the text of this is where you might be.
Yeah, I
I really
mean,
like
in
that.
the opening line is, "Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood," and to me, like that has always stuck with me for years and years and years. Of he's addressing you like, "Look, I don't want to live this life. This is just who I am. These
Yeah.
are all the things I go through, and you're reading basically my diary, my interpretation of it." It's funny you mentioned Harry Potter, and I'm sure this will come up later when we talk about the camp itself. Well, as much as I was into Harry Potter, I know my house.
Mhm.
Figuring out which god was your godly parent was my Harry Potter sorting house.
Oh,
Like that was
yeah.
100%. I mean, we'll get into it more probably when we get to the camp, but have you thought about who your godly parent would be?
I had not until just now. I know, like, I'm feeling like Artemis, like
Okay.
Hestia, especially because I always want to be like, who are we talking about the least? That's got to be my favorite. Like,
There you go.
what were your answers though?
So, growing up, you're always
Mhm.
like, "Oh yeah, I'm Poseidon." And
Yeah.
especially like being a Florida boy, like I would go to the beach all the time. But for a while, I'm like, oh, it's probably, like Apollo performing and just being super like charismatic, just like and love talking to people. Now that I'm older, because I still think about this, it definitely probably would be like Hermes.
Hmm.
Jack of all trades, master of none, wander, kind of take anyone they can under their wing, because that's the whole thing with the Hermes cabin is they have everyone come in there and they're all like
Right.
welcome. And I'm like, that probably would be my parent. So like that is who I relate to. And I did have a blog growing up, um, Percy Jackson on Tumblr, named after the Stoll brothers, who are two prominent Hermes kids.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask this. Like, I know the series branches off a lot and is still going. I know they get into like Egyptian gods. Do they get into any other pantheons? I was really
So
interested in this whole idea of like the West, and that was really interesting.
So Rick Riordan, Uncle Rick, as a lot of people call him, he, like you said, wrote this for a series because he used to do like mythology specifically. He knows a lot about Greek and Roman and Norse, but he did this because his son was really into Greek mythology. While this series was coming out, he did the Kane Chronicles, which is about Egyptian mythology. And then following the Percy Jackson Olympian series, he did the Heroes of Olympus series, which was about the Romans and the Greeks kind of, coming head to head and like that transition of like, well, if the gods were real there, you know, different personas, right? Zeus is also Jupiter, stuff like that. He has a whole series, I believe that you can call it, called like Rick Riordan Presents, and he teams up with other writers who know more about different backgrounds, ideologies, so they write about realistic stories within their mythology. Which
Nice.
yeah, it seems super appealing to me solely because like, I don't know about every mythology. I couldn't write
Yeah.
about all of them. Could I write about Greek? Maybe a little bit, not as good as others, but like there's one about Chinese mythology that's still on my list, and I'm like, I would have no idea where to go with that. But
Yeah.
it's cool seeing these other stories told. But he himself has written Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Norse.
Those feel like the big three.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely the big ones. Well, yeah, so we talked about how it opens up with I didn't want to be a half-blood. And first off, did you notice how the chapter titles, like I know it's like directed like it's a YA novel,
Mhm.
but all the chapter titles are amazing, all of them.
Yeah.
Hold on, I have my copy right here.
Yeah.
The very first title is I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Like
Oh yeah.
it
He's very good at the hook. The whole thing really grabs you.
I agree entirely. The first hook of like, oh, what's it mean to be a half-blood of? He gets rid of Mrs. Dodds and, oh, what does this mean? No one remembers her now. Everything, mom vanishing, like, oh, what's this quest? Every chapter, he does a very good job of leaving you on a cliffhanger, even if it's the little one. So
Mhm.
props
It's
to Rick for
yeah.
that.
It's got a real momentum to it. Absolutely.
100%. I think that one thing he does very well is he creates like one of the perfect like road trip sort of stories.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah.
mean, we both write both like film and TV, but I feel like it kind of hits every point you need for like a film road trip to where you have a quest, right? He goes on the quest, obstacle overcome, and they kind of, they keep getting the stakes raised every time. He has a ticking clock. It's amazing. I
Hmm.
I think that's why this book kind of holds the test of time and why, it's had so many different series spin off of it, adaptations still coming out this year. So
Yeah.
what did you think? Because this was your first read through, right?
Yeah. I was underwhelmed by it. I think it was like whatever book I read for this episode was gonna have a hard time because the one I did before this was the entire Hunger Games series, which I adore. I was
You
like
did the
life
entire series?
changing. I had two guests for that episode. We recorded for an hour and a half, and then we were like, yeah, this it has to be 10 more episodes. New book club happening. And so that is gonna just keep happening until we have nothing left to say. But I like really, really loved those books. I like resonated with Katniss in a way that I didn't expect. So I think this book was just like set up for failure. I should have done like
Oh,
the next book is Bridge to Terabithia, which I did read when I was young, and I remember really not liking. I should have flipped them. I also think it just felt very reminiscent of Harry Potter for me. I think like
yeah.
in a lot of ways, and I think that frustrated me. I think I was really frustrated with the character of Annabeth. I think because to me she just read like she read as like a nah gonna know it all, and girls mess up all the fun. And I think I just got to this point of like, and I think it exists in a lot of the literature in the series at the time, is like girls aren't allowed to be silly, and I don't think we like interrogate why girls are so hung up on like consequences and like following rules. And like I think like in the same way Hermione functions as like, guys, this fun thing is gonna whoop our ass in a month, and like it's not gonna be fun. And I think I just like, I think I felt so like as an Annabeth, and then being like that this is like there is more to us than this, I think was the thing.
I could see you really relate to Annabeth. Not in like the negative aspects that we just talked about, but like as the character grows throughout the
Yeah.
series, I could see you really
Mhm.
resonating with her. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of good points, especially for the first book for her.
Mhm.
Because Annabeth starts out with I mean, especially when she first meets Percy, of like,
Mhm.
I am using you to like go on this quest because this is what I want to do. This is what I want to achieve. I want to prove myself.
Mhm.
And I think that all because what she's been there 5 years at Camp
5 years.
Half-Blood, yeah,
Mhm.
and she basically they're 12 now, so she was I think 7 when she gets
7.
picked up, yeah, which is super
Yeah.
young for a Half-Blood.
Yeah.
Has two role models of Luke and Talia.
Mhm.
Sees Talia die in front of her, get turned into a tree, and then like never gets a chance to like
Mhm.
truly prove herself to try and like say, she wants to make her mom proud. She wants to make the other campers, respect her more. I mean, she is super respected because she's been there for so long. But I think the first book of her just being a full timer at camp
Mhm.
really has more of that negative side to her. And she
Yeah.
does, they do open up a bit and they do like connect a bit more
Mhm.
and some of those walls come down. But I think that's a fair criticism that the first book, Annabeth, is largely very to the point of we need to do this. This is a
Mhm.
ticking clock. But I think she's had a lot of trauma to
Yeah, oh,
warrant it in the first book.
absolutely. She is definitely like set up to be the person who like all of it makes sense for her
Yeah,
backstory, and like has clearly your heart really breaks for her. Like she cannot catch a break.
no, not at all.
And it definitely the book in a whole feels like it very much feels like a first book. Like you
Yeah,
can tell how much more is to come.
yeah.
Yeah.
This was a good adventure.
Yeah.
And it's one piece of the puzzle, right?
Definitely.
Okay, so first time reading it though, fair criticism for Annabeth. What did you think about the relationship between like the gods and the children? Like how? Okay, so for Percy Jackson, this is the first time you've indulged in any of the media for it, or did you see the movie back in the day or the musical that came out a few years back?
So I don't think I knew that there was a musical. It feels like vaguely familiar that that happened, but I don't think I knew that. I I think my only experience with it is one time, I think when I was home visiting my parents in college, I like walked in and they were watching the second one. It was pretty early on in the second one, and I was like, that is Giles attached to a horse. And I was like, I can't stay for this, guys. I gotta leave the room. What the fuck? And I think that's all I had.
Yeah, I mean, even that being all you have, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Good job leaving that.
And like Anthony Stewart Head, I know Pierce Brosnan did it in the first movie. Anthony Stewart Head, love that guy. And like that character almost like very Giles in terms of like wanting how familiar are you with Buffy?
You're not gonna like this answer.
None? That's okay. That means you have a
I
great journey
I
ahead of
saw the
you.
movie for Buffy.
Oh, buddy.
I know, I know, this is terrible.
Not a good primer for you.
I know,
Um,
that's why, and I didn't even like. I got sat down and people were like, "You have to watch this." So I was like, "Oh, I hear people talk about Buffy all the time." Yeah, no, it was not a good opening.
yeah, especially like it's been a long time since I've seen the movie and I only saw it once. The tones from what I remember, very different. Like the most memorable part of that movie is Paul Rubens' death that just keeps happening.
Yeah,
And like the TV show is hilarious, but that it's a very different style of comedy. It's
yeah,
very
I
like,
believe you. It was
yeah,
the movie was something, but
yeah. But Anthony Stewart Head is a phenomenal actor. Like I really, it's weird how much like the genesis of my career is because of him. I grew up watching Buffy, since birth. And I remember looking at the TV guide when I was like in sixth grade that came with the Washington Post. And on the cover, it was a poster for Merlin. It's one season on NBC. And I was like, that's Giles in the back. Weird. I have to watch this. I watched it. I watched it when it got kicked to Sci-Fi. I watched it pirated and like 10-minute chunks on YouTube. And that was the show that I remember watching one of the first episodes, and they had this shot of Anthony Stewart Head like walking in, and it was shot from the ground looking up, and I was like, oh, this is like establishing character, this is like establishing that like he has power and like we are smaller, and that was the moment I was like, oh, people make TV, like this is a job I could do. So love to that man. Really.
Love to that man,
Really
just
big fan.
not the second movie. Okay. So, but besides that a little bit, this was your first
Yeah.
okay. So one of the things that always stuck out to me a lot within this book, and then it gets expanded upon, especially within the first 5 book series, is the relationship between like the gods and their kids.
Mhm.
How like Hermes'
Yeah.
cabin is so full because like some of the gods don't claim them. It feels a lot of those kids, and there's a whole musical number about it in the musical at the campfire song, how like, the gods don't care about them.
Yeah.
Like they sire their kids and then they're like, all right, well, you have to fight our wars, go do that.
Exactly.
And you're just expected to do it. And I think I don't want to jump to the very end of the book, but certain characters, I mean, we talk about Luke,
Mhm.
holds that resentment of like his
Yeah.
father not caring about him and like none of the gods caring about him. And I think
Yeah.
that was one of the realest motivations for a villain in a long time where I go, I see where he's coming from.
Yeah.
The gods basically put you on the earth to do their bidding, and then they're like, all right.
I think that like noticing throughout a lot of different series, like Hunger Games, Harry Potter, this one, it's all about like children are pawns of the adults and
Mhm.
have to live through the consequences that adults make, which is very like climate change and like school, like very, very relatable and prescient. And I was thinking about it a lot. I don't know as much about the book series and franchises and things that came before us just because like we weren't around to see
Why?
the
Yeah.
zeitgeist as it was. But at the same time, I was thinking like these are all kind of like passive protagonists because things are happening to them. And I think like I was thinking of us as writers as like kids going to school learning how to write. And I was like, well, of fucking course, we're all coming up with passive protagonists because like that is the story model we've been given. But I think also like that's true to what childhood feels like. It's things happening to you and you having to react. I think like it's okay to have a passive protagonist if they're a child. Like that's how the world works when you're a child. I think that was something that kept really striking me throughout these books is like these are 12-year-olds. These are young babies.
Yeah. I mean, they talk about it a bit when they first go to camp too, but it's like, oh, Annabeth saw Talia get turned into a tree in front of her. They're like, oh, a lot of them, if they make up the hill, generally they make it alive. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how many
Yeah.
die? And like, we don't witness any of them dying per se in this book. But like in this grandiose series as a whole, yeah, there's some battles and they're like, yeah, you like
Mm-hmm.
that character? Kind of
Yeah.
gone now, and it's like, oh shit, like you kind of forget that these are 12 to like
Yeah.
really 17 is like the oldest.
Yeah,
It's
there's some like really startling moments of adulthood that I noticed, like clocking that. I think like the actual text is like that Aphrodite and Ares are just like making out, but like Rick Riordan is writing like these people are fucking in an abandoned carousel with mirrors everywhere. And it was like, that's a lot, Rick. And I was going through my notes before this, it's a throwaway line, but they're like, Ares's motorcycle has human skin as the
yes,
leather on it.
yeah,
And they even like Percy reflects on it, but by the end, he's just like, Krusty, gotta die. Sorry, murder. Like, that's how it's gotta be at this point. Here we go. And kind of I think that was like startling, but in the same moment of like the character is aware of it. Like we are dealing with those ramifications as we go, which I
yeah,
respected. It rides that line in a way that feels very accurate. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, especially earlier in the book when he was like, fighting Mrs. Dodds, fighting the Minotaur. It's very like I will do my best to get away. All right, I can't, self-defense sort of thing.
Hmm.
And when he knows he's like, I have to battle Ares because he's going to stop us, he's like, all right, I will do
Yeah.
this fight. Like I walk into it knowing. I feel like that's really a lot of growth within the character
Hmm.
for a 12-year-old.
Yeah. For a 12-year-old. Yeah.
Uh, I always, maybe it's because like I have a bigger connection to my mother, but I love his mother in this, Sally Jackson. My note says Sally Jackson, greatest mother of all time.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. Reading it as an adult, her relationship with Gabe is probably physically abusive, like certainly emotionally abusive.
100%.
And when that reveal comes, when Percy realizes that he is physically abusive, that is, I think, like the hardest moment of the book emotionally to go through. And it is like the least fantastical, the most normal of all of the events.
And it's that realization, if I remember right, that comes near the end of the book where
Hmm.
he really, yeah,
Yeah.
that's after he realizes that, oh, she's only with him to
Hmm.
cover my smell as a half-blood, to make it so that like I can live with her a little bit because she's worried about my safety. It's not even
Yeah.
anything to do with her. There's a lot of parallels to that with like, you could say people staying in abuse relationships for
Hmm.
whatever reason. And like
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of poetic justice
Yeah. Oh fuck
to
yeah.
Gabe at the end of it,
He
but
gets what he deserves. Absolutely. It should have happened earlier. Yeah.
he just didn't have a chance. He didn't have a chance
Yeah.
till the end.
It happens when it happens. I think that's also like just a lesson of adulthood is like it didn't happen when it should have, but it happened and we have to move on from that.
Yeah.
Them's the breaks, I
Yeah.
guess.
So reading this for the first time as an adult,
Mhm.
did some of the twists and turns, did you see it coming? So
I
like
100% saw Luke being the villain. 100%. Yeah. But I think it's because like he does not fit. Like he is the exception. He's like the child of Hermes, but is like very good at fighting, which is not like a Hermes thing. He's like, I think it was also mine knowing this, like generally knowing the series. Like I know Annabeth is a character. I like know Grover is a big character
yeah,
throughout. And it's like, I don't know about this guy. It's probably why
yeah.
the character of Grover is very interesting to me in that like you are setting up a trio and yet one of them is not really a child.
They did say he's like mentally
Yeah.
a kid.
Yeah. It's odd to have him and Annabeth to a sense, and it's not a criticism to have like outsized knowledge that maybe a kid wouldn't have. It's like very useful in the end. You are going on a quest with the two like most useful kids, certainly in the camp.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does work out really well for him. His mentality was like, I'm gonna bring my best friend because I feel bad that I ran away, and because I ran away, he may like never be able to do his lifelong dream of trying to find Pan.
Yeah.
And this was him being like, come on, if we do this, they'll let you go out and search.
Yeah.
And
What
Annabeth
was
was like, I'm
Yeah,
going.
too fucking bad.
Yeah.
What I
Yeah.
loved about Grover being a satyr is this is strange. I like always wore long corduroy pants in high school, corduroy black skinny jeans, whatever. But one of my friends always was like, Aaron, we don't know what could be under there. You could be a satyr for all we know. Your shoes look like hooves. And the whole
Oh
time I was
my
like,
God.
how the for yeah, that's the thing of like I think I talked to you about it a lot of like, why were my high school friends so mean? Like,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
100%.
like, why did I accept that? But it was like such a specific thing that felt so weird, but also like felt right to like kids with too much knowledge for their own good, just like really smart kids running around being really fucking mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, same way with me looking back in middle school and being like, these were all my friends. We play games every night and all that. We said the most foulest stuff. And
Yes.
I look back and I go, this is why I connected so much to this book, because I'm like,
Hmm.
I felt terrible all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
There were moments like senior year of high school being like looking at our friend group from a distance and being like, oh, we all like band together because we are so terrified of being alone. We like share our most intimate and vulnerable secrets just so that when we are losing a hand of Uno during lunch, we can scream them at each other. You know, I'm glad I'm not a child anymore, you know?
no, I can't imagine what it's like now. But I
It's
mean,
a fucking
maybe
brutal time. Yeah.
I wonder if these books still do well, right? Like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I still connect with them from a nostalgic point of view, but I can see kids still growing up now talking to them
Hmm.
and still connecting with these characters
Oh, yeah.
because of that whole sense. I mean,
Hmm.
aside from the whole fact of like, oh, hey, I fit that ADHD and dyslexia
Yeah.
like to a T, I think there's a lot of people who read it and be like, I could this sounds like a great place. Like,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
the ultimate dream to, if you
exactly.
feel out of place, to find a place designed for you. Absolutely. And I think it is easily my favorite thing about this book, and I will love Rick Riordan forever for it, is that your disabilities are actually superpowers. I think
Yeah.
I love that. I'm so glad that he put that into the world and gave it to children.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Uncle Rick. So you pinned Luke from the beginning. Yeah. Did you actually think he was working with Hades to get the bull? Did you see the whole double switcheroo happening?
I don't think so. I think I do like that they're setting up the Chronos storyline, because I think that is something that is infinitely interesting about Greek mythology, is that gods have parents and it can keep kind of like going back. There is a before, like where the Bible is like, no, day one, nothing.
Yeah.
Day two, something. What happened before? Don't worry about it. Because I think it adds interesting layers that like necessarily Christianity doesn't really get into, of like what is the relationship between like child and parent, and how does that play when you have all this power. So points to that. I don't think I saw the Chronos of it coming, but I like respected him and am interested in it. I think I was like disappointed a little bit in the I felt with Hades, and I think maybe they start to change this near the end. It's mostly in the setup, but that there is like good versus evil. Hades bad. Hades down in the ground, like father of Hitler. World War II, all that bad is that guy. The end.
Yeah.
Bad, which felt a little reductive to me, especially like, and maybe this is like a little bit too much for children, but like death is not an evil thing. It's a natural thing. It's just another part of life.
I
Oh,
think they dive more into that in the
yeah.
future because I do think by the end of it they do have like Hades being like, look, this is just my job.
Yeah,
I don't.
absolutely. They like are definitely planting the seeds of that from the first book. There's like this element of like all really anyone here wants is like a little bit of attention, to be treated as an individual rather than just a mass.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, Ares has that same thing. That's why he was with Kronos. Is
Hmm.
he's like, well, first off, God of War. Yes, he wants war, but
Yeah.
also at certain points, he's like, I feel Athena also being a god of war.
Hmm.
He's like, I'm going over here to prop up Kronos. And later in the series, it's not just Ares who
Hmm.
sides with the Titans in terms of God v Titans, you know?
Yeah.
And it really does that whole thing of like, hey, being neglected and being like put in this box or being, pushed aside because you're not Zeus, because
Hmm.
like you're not one of the 12, right? Really does paint it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and you
Yeah.
see how that affects people. And like, I know we're only talking about the first book, but
That's okay.
you see that with like some of the minor gods who like they have kids too, and their kids, if they get claimed by them, right, if they find out, they feel like they're put on a lower tier, right? Like
Hmm.
obviously it doesn't help that Percy's viewed as like one of the big three, and yes, he's
Yeah.
super powerful and like, as the main character, thank gods he is.
Yeah.
But it's tough if you're a normal camper at camp and you're like, oh, my parent is Hypno,
Yeah.
the god of sleep, or Hestia, like we even said, where it's like they're not as important. It's like, well, if I was with Chronos' side, I would be viewed at an equal level, as opposed to big three, everyone else, and
Yeah.
then me, just because of who my parent is.
Hmm.
It's tough, and it's sort of like an interesting take on classism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like I respect that definitely from a writing perspective, of like not only do you have a chosen one in this book, but you also have a lot of discussion of like what does it feel like to not be that chosen one. Absolutely.
So, talking about the first book,
Hmm.
they made the movie. Not great. We don't talk about it.
Yes.
The new series is about to
Hmm.
come out with Rick Riordan being a key part of it.
Hmm.
And I know you watched when you talked about the Summer I Turned Pretty. You've seen some of the show for that as well, right?
No, I had just seen like
Okay.
trailer, and the same for this one. I watched the trailer and threw out just because like I did this as a reader as a kid. I think this is like being an entertainment person. You have to
Yeah.
cast it in your head. So I was looking up like
100%.
who was it and who is it now, and yeah, Jason Matsoukas is Dionysus. It's like yeah, good job
Yep.
casting.
100%. You're like, you know what? That makes
Couldn't
sense.
be anyone else.
The original movie had Nathan Fillion was Hermes, and he like wore
Huh.
like a UPS jumpsuit basically, and it felt weird.
Yeah, I mean, like Nathan Fillion feels like, I mean, that was his era. He was a
I was
hot
about to say
commodity.
2010-ish, right? Like
Yeah, it
2011 or something.
was like peak castle era. Yeah, but like not the right character. That you could see I could see that as like anyone else. I can see it. It's like
Anyone else.
Poseidon, Hermes, like maybe Zeus. Oh.
So first time reading it though, was there any other thoughts I came across? Because like I said, this book and this series as a whole is
Mhm.
near and dear to my heart. And it's
Oh
still
yeah.
like it's geared towards kids, and I can like read it now looking back and be like, this is still probably like a bit under my like this analogy is a bit under my level, but I still
Mhm.
like I love it, you know?
Yeah, whatever works, right? Like whatever emotionally gets you through the terrors of childhood and feel seen and heard and not alone. I think like that is the promise of a lot of these books is that you are not alone, and then yet in the like in the text of it finding out how lonely, like you can't escape the loneliness. I'm so sorry, that's part of life.
The one thing is like you're lonely because like oh you're an outsider. You find a found family, and then you're lonely because your parents never around.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have just a giant daycare for divorced kids. And I'm like, you
Mhm.
know what? Was I a divorced kid? No. But based on my relationships with my parents, I'm like,
Yeah.
I could definitely connect with that a hundred
Yeah.
percent. And it's so fascinating. And I also love that it's written from Percy's point of view. You talked
Mhm.
about Rick he was an English teacher for a long time. Like I think he was a middle school English teacher
Mhm.
before he stopped to like write these books full time. And it comes from a place where it seems very genuine. The point of view
Oh yeah.
does come off as how a kid would view it. And I think that really connects with the tone of Percy, you know, his point of view, his wants, his needs. And as like a kid reading it, you're like, this kid's me.
Mhm.
Like maybe Percy did write this.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole thing. And in the Kane Chronicles, not to jump to a different series,
Yeah. Okay.
it opens with this is a recording I found. Some of the transcriptions may be different. And this one was this book was dropped off to me about Percy's life. So
Ooh.
it's like Rick was told the story from Percy and
Mhm.
he just like transcribed it or he just put it into print. And I always love that because I'm like, it feels so genuine. It comes
Yeah.
from such a wholesome place.
Yeah. And I noticed that in the acknowledgments for this book, Riordan lists out like all of the middle school students who were his beta testers and who read the book first and gave feedback.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's just a good dude. That's just a good person, you know? And I think
Yeah.
that also comes across in the text of just like it is written with a lot of love, like for a parent to an individual child, but also like from a teacher to children at large. I really respected that.
Yeah, and I mean the wholesomeness, like I said, the community and like a lot of the readers call him Uncle Rick because they view
Mhm.
him as like a family member. And with all the we compared it to Harry Potter, with all the JK issues coming up
Yeah.
about like her personal morals, there's a whole comparison with Rick where in the earlier books it's like Rick, this was stereotypical or these characters came off as XYZ. And a lot of his responses to that feedback is, okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then in the next book, it's like more diversity, more inclusion. And like this was still 2005, and like these are kids. But like when they're like hitting the age of 16, 17, the characters start to date and all that. And like he dives into the idea of like being basically an orphan and then also figuring out you're gay and like all these other things. So I think that the tone and the point of view of Percy and like how wholesome it feels
Mhm.
stays true throughout the entire series.
That's good. And I think it's definitely like he is definitely writing to the kids who feel abandoned. And there is this real sense of like you have a place. And that's I think that must be so special and so just important and I see like why it resonated with you and why
Oh,
it continues to
100%.
resonate. Yeah.
Percy is only the focal point in this series, then
Mhm.
he in the not counting spin-offs. He's also one of the lead characters in the Heroes of Olympus series. But there was an announcement, not to date when we're recording this, but like
No,
this
that's
is
okay.
October 2023. Less than a month ago, he did a book talk where he talked about the next series, which will focus on Percy again. Everyone's so excited because like not only like we love the universe, but like
Mhm.
this is our guy. This is us
Yeah.
growing up. Like we are older, and the last it's great that he continues to write for it, and as Percy runs into more difficult real slash fictional obstacles, it relates more to like the kids who are still reading it,
Mhm.
and it paces so well. And even though he's still such a kid in this book, you still see like him maturing a little bit, him
Mhm.
growing. Does he still make foolish kid things? Yeah, He's
Yeah, of
12.
course. Yeah.
He's
He's
12.
12.
Cut him a little bit of slack. Yeah. So you said out of the characters,
Mhm.
who would you say you connected with the most?
I think like probably if I had been a kid, I'm an Annabeth. Like
Yeah.
absolutely. 100% bossy.
Yeah.
Like we have things to do, sir. Why aren't we doing them? I'm still like that. I to this day, I probably said this to you at some point in college of like, listen, if someone has to be the bitch to get things done, let me do it. Like,
Oh,
like that.
100%.
Yeah,
When we
that's
were
why I yeah.
outlining.
I wanted to ask, how did you receive their description of LA now having lived here for a while?
Oh my gosh. So, I've reread the series a fair amount of times, but not since I moved out here. It was interesting reading it and then like listening to the audiobook because I jump back and forth. And the way it's delivered in the audiobook is they're like, well, hell's in LA. Where else would it be? And I'm like, oh my God.
What
That
a New
is
Yorker.
what a New Yorker. But also I'm like, is he wrong?
Yeah, I think it's like you gotta take all of LA. Like it's got
Yeah.
its good parts and it's got its bad parts. And I think that is a distinction between LA people and New York people. New York people will be like, no slander. You can't slander my city. I will accept no criticism. And LA people are like, yep, some of it sucks. A lot of it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny because my vast knowledge of New York is
Mhm.
because of this series.
Yeah.
I mean, later books too. But I told you this, and the movie's out now. So like, I worked on the movie Miranda's Victim last year, and we had to deliver drives to Long Island. So
Mhm.
my only time I've ever been in New York really is driving to Long Island at 2 in the morning, having to pay a $25 toll, somehow being stuck in traffic still
At 2 in the
and
morning.
at 2 in the morning and it's 2 lane street and someone stops and I go, oh, I guess, I'm not from here. It must be like rule of the lane, like, hey, if you gotta like get someone get out, you go in the right lane, you do that. So then I go in the left lane, go around them, and I go up to the next lane, someone's doing that in the left lane. I go, all right, now what are we doing? It's two
Hmm.
lanes, we can't just keep stopping. It's utter madness, and I did not enjoy the city.
No.
But
Yeah.
I think to me that's how I view New York, and I'm sure every time I tell that to someone in New York, they're like, no, 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 no. But
That's not
if you
it. That's not
yeah, if you didn't have a car,
it.
if you walked, if you took the subway,
Yeah,
you
you'd
would
get it.
you would understand it. And you're right though. It's so interesting that they view LA as that. You talked before. You like how I do as well. Their whole idea of gods. They talk in the when he first tell him gods are real. He goes, God? He goes, well, not the big G. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. But gods, small G, they follow the West. And they talk about how, obviously Mount Olympus is at the top of the Empire State Building and hell is in LA. How did that feel? Like, I think to me, that was a really cool way to modernize
Hmm.
what a lot of
Certainly.
Greek mythology is. Because it's like, oh, if you go through the Sea of Monsters, through this strait, you will hit this place. You go here, this is where Mount Olympus is, this is where Athens is. And I feel like
Hmm.
they shifted that pretty well and it made sense. I feel
Hmm.
like it grounded the world in a very fictional place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is very good at grafting on, and I think this probably being a teacher and especially an English and a history teacher of making things applicable to young kids and understanding what's going to hit for them and how to make it feel accurate. And I think like we talked about it being a road trip. I think love road trips. I think this does a great job of it. I think like it's also smart to be like there are kids who are going to be reading it in Denver be like, oh my god, my city got a shout out, and people reading it in Vegas and or kids reading it in Vegas be like, oh my god. I think that is just a smart thing to be able to reach. We have such marketing brains now.
I was gonna say,
Four quadrants.
talking about marketing brain, I was gonna talk about the storytelling brain. The way he
Hmm.
he does shift everything to like the West and how we do on this road trip. As storytellers, you look and you go, "Oh, that closes so many holes."
Hmm.
Like this one line being like, "Well, obviously it's because of this." You're like, "Oh, he definitely just
He
fixed
thought of
it."
it.
Because I mean, within our own writing when we wrote together, because
Mhm.
we wrote a how would you describe it? Like a murder mystery, sort of a
Yeah,
sci-fi.
yeah.
Yeah.
We wrote a sexy teen murder mystery show.
There you go. I think
Yeah,
sexy team murder mystery. We were told, yeah.
yeah. We were told make it sexy, and
We
we're
were
like,
told make it sexy, so it
okay,
was a
this is
sexy team murder mystery.
school. Weird.
God, I
Okay,
mean, these are our classmates, but whatever.
make him kiss.
But while we were trying to outline that and write it, I know a lot of times we're like, okay, but why wouldn't this be a thing? How do we
Mhm.
justify this? Especially because reading this after we spend so much time doing that and like other scripts where I'm like, all right, well, how do I make sure that this isn't a question? Like, why make this make sense? Make it so people don't question the rules of the world. I thought he does such a good job of like that first chapter or two where he gets to camp being like, gods are real. Why? Well, this is why, you know. Well, are they myths? You know, you're going to be a myth 2,000 years from
Mhm.
now. Why is that any different from the gods? Like, okay. Okay. I
Mhm.
felt like from a storytelling perspective,
Yeah.
it was very impressive to look back on and be like, this was for children. And he left no room to question it.
Yeah, and I think that's also, like, having so many kids read it is probably, like, a great thing, and I think also, like, speaking to the beauty of collaboration, I think, like, writing that series, there were so many things that, like, I wouldn't have seen or come up with that you pointed out or that, like, Adrian pointed out, and I think that, like, I can't praise the high points, the good things of, merit. I can't praise them. I'm a fucking writer. I can't praise the merits of collaboration enough. And I think he gets that. And I think speaking about reading things as writers and the artistry and the craft, how do you, as a writer, feel about dream sequences? Because I gotta say, I fucking
Oh,
hate them.
yeah. Okay. That is, I can't disagree with you at all because I view dream sequences the same way I view like overuse of flashbacks.
Oh yeah. It
Of
felt like
being
any time in class if someone like said, and then we're gonna have a dream sequence, I felt like I needed a spray bottle. Be like, stop. No. You're
well
cheating.
I felt that way with my one of the first shorts I wrote because I'm like, all right, he's gonna wake up and I'm like, why? Like looking back on it,
Yeah.
I go, why? Why does he have to wake up at this point? Like, why are we starting the story with him waking up? This is such a slow way to start it.
Mhm.
But for dream sequences, it's like, oh well, he needs to know a little bit about this.
Yeah.
How do we know a little bit about this? And it's like, I feel like we talked about Harry Potter. In
Mhm.
the magical worlds, I feel like they use this device a lot,
Mhm.
sometimes too much, of being like, well, you have a dream. You're connected somehow.
Yeah.
And it's worse in the second Percy Jackson book because he has a connection to someone else. And you're like, oh, well, we got to see how they're doing. Let's jump to a dream sequence to get a little bit of the whole
No.
thing. But
Wait, separately.
yes.
I know we've talked Dimension 20. I'm watching Misfits in
Ooh.
Magic, which is their let's have American kids go to Hogwarts and point out all the fucking things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
I love that. Hold on. I have to send my boyfriend a picture. Hold on. Of our shopping list. He's calling. Okay, I'm back. We gotta get that shredded cheese, you know?
Oh, I mean, you know me and cheese.
We gotta get, yeah, more than one thing on that list. It's cheese. All right. Good. As it should be.
Good thing we're not lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
Although I might be. Something we'll
Well,
figure
I
out.
think we all are a little bit, maybe, you know?
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed. Okay, so what were we saying right before?
American
Yes,
collaboration. Dream
America
sequences.
dream sequences. Yeah, I get why they're used, especially in this book, because it sort of adds into the mystery of like who's actually behind this. Like
Hmm.
if he's behind this, why is he offering to give, you know, his mother back?
Yeah.
I get why it's used.
Hmm. I appreciated in this book that he had a dream when they were in Vegas, and then he like forgot parts of the dream because of they were getting trapped in this eternal thing. I appreciated that of like I had a dream, but then I forgot it, and now it's coming from him. I felt like that. I really respected that. I was like, I'll let you get away with that one, sure.
I feel like it was very self-understanding of being like, all right, well,
Mhm.
if he's gonna have these drinks, we have to at least make it to where he has a dream, but he doesn't remember it. So I'm like, all right, you know what? You
Yeah.
ground yourself a little bit. And we don't talk about the movies, but talking about Vegas. A lot of people view only two good scenes in those movies,
Yeah.
maybe three. One of them being, this is a pen, where Logan Lerman just like
Hmm.
where he questions why the hell he was throwing a pen. The second one is where they're definitely just getting high in Vegas.
Oh yeah.
Then they go in
Took
there,
it.
and
Yeah.
I think it plays. Oh shoot, gonna be bad. I want to say it plays Poker Face, but I'm not 100% sure. It's the Lotus Hotel and Casino. They go in there, and in the book, they really establish it well to then be like, "Oh, we're just having fun. We're gambling. People aren't questioning that 12-year-olds are in here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, who cares?" They ask someone, they're like, "Oh, what day is it?" And they say a date. They're like, "Oh, that feels weird." And like, "What year?" And they're like, 1960 or like something like that. And they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is bad." But there's not many things that are redeeming about the movies, but that sequence
Yeah,
universally within the community is viewed as like, all right, we'll let that one live. That's
yeah.
fine. Let's look at the other points in the.
Mhm.
Oh, we didn't talk about Medusa at all. How did how did you think that? I mean, obviously it's a fight, and
Mhm.
from like a kid's book, it was very interesting to read how that fight
Yeah.
turns out. But it does have a interesting description of like, well, she was wrong, and like
Yeah,
a lot of
which I
times now
appreciate. Yeah.
I feel like a lot more people are talking about like, well, Medusa has done a lot of
Mhm.
terrible things. She has a whole
Yeah.
emporium full of statues of people
Mhm.
she's frozen. But like gods really did fuck her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
I know
they
that she's been sort of like lionized recently as like a symbol for victims of assault. A lot
oh, I
of
didn't know that.
yeah, like well, so much of, and I know like there's a wave of like Greek retelling novels, especially YA, that I think like the epitome is like Song of Achilles, which is a phenomenal book. But there's one with Medusa that came out recently or fairly recently, and I think there is this movement of like a lot of things that this character does weren't done to her. I think even the turning people to stone is like a thing done to her.
Yeah.
So that how much does that fucking suck? You can't even look at anybody. Like I think like he to my memory, like the Medusa myth is a story about rape. And while Riordan doesn't have, because it's a book for 12-year-olds, like still does a very good job sort of introducing that nuance. I think like we said, like the book is setting up a lot. It feels, and not in a bad way, it does feel unfinished. It felt like there's much more to this world and we've only dipped a toe in.
Well, 100%. I mean, the book ends, with the fight with Luke and being like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'm still out there," and you're like, "Oh, well, if he's still out there, there's still stuff that's gonna happen."
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but he decides he wants to spend the school year with his mother,
Mm-hmm.
but he's gonna go back to camp. He has a
Yeah.
place to return to. He finally has. I mean, we all love Sally. He
Mm-hmm.
loves his mother, but he finally finds a home. He finally finds a full family,
Yeah.
and like honestly, if Sally could be like in camp, I
Yeah.
don't think Percy would ever leave.
No, I think
100%.
like that decision is 100% made because he just spent the whole book thinking she's dead.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
although I did want to talk about summer camp. Like, summer camp
Yeah.
was huge to me. Like, genuinely finding, like, I spent all of elementary school being like, I'm gonna have summer camp where my friend who actually likes me is gonna be. So I'll put up with this bullshit of third grade to get to those 10 days of summer.
I've heard this exact conversation because I was listening to all of
Yeah.
required reading before this, and I want to say
Laura.
I was about to say in the summer I turned pretty. I think you talk about that as well.
Yeah, that
Um,
important.
exactly. Well, but you did Girl Scouts all growing up. I
Yeah.
believe you've spoken about that in detail. I've told you I did Boy Scouts a lot growing
Hmm.
up, Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So like every summer for a week, I would just be out there. I only did Boy Scouts until kind of freshman year of high school. I in middle school, like it really was like, oh, I can go camping, I can have like a place to be. But that turned into like my family and my place to be turned into band when I was in high
Yeah.
school, right?
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
couldn't juggle both. But I was one away from top rank or one away from Eagle.
Mhm.
I just had to do the project and I
Yeah.
didn't end up doing it. And like one other merit badge, so it was fine. But point being, every summer I would go and just be out there for a week. And I relate so much to being like, I would love to just be out here.
Yeah.
Like not only just like being out in nature, which like we're both in LA now in the city, we don't get that as much or as
Yeah.
but you be out there, whether it's like archery, whether it's this or that, whether it's just like I once took like a sailing course and I was
Oh.
just like, yeah, I was just small boat sailing. And like I'm not rich. So I don't have a I never had like a boat
But
back home.
goddamn, do we love boats?
But goddamn, like if I was a rich man, I would give myself a boat.
But apparently, my boyfriend works for like business management, like the people
Yeah.
who manage rich people's money. And he's like, don't buy a boat, rent a boat, don't buy a boat, don't buy a boat.
Well, I, I feel
Rent a
like this
boat.
I want to find out why, but this feels like going too far off a tangent to
No, I
find
feel
out
like it's
why.
insurance and upkeep and like
Oh,
housing
okay,
it, I
okay.
think. Yeah,
That's fine.
it's all the boat plus
I could see
finances.
that. But yeah, no, summer camp was a big thing for me. And
Mhm.
like normally like I had a troop, right? So
Mhm.
you would go with the troop, the same guys. But you could also go provisional, Provo, to in Florida, the big camp for summer camp was Camp Lenoche, one of the bigger ones in the US. So I would go there and basically you were like Camp Half-Blood. You were the box of misfit toys. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's basically like you want to go to camp for a week, your troop might be going a week you can't go, or like you want to go again, you want to earn whatever it is, right? You want to earn
Mhm.
merit badges, you want to be at summer camp for another
Yeah.
week. So you're just like bunking with random people, you're meeting new people for a
Mhm.
week, and like I've met like friends for life there. There's so
Yeah.
many people you would go and like go on all these adventures, and you're like, this is summer camp. Like I am
Mhm.
just with people I never met before doing this,
Yeah.
and not to tangent away, but did you see theater camp?
I haven't yet, no. I think,
I
like, I'm having this issue where I can't like, going to see movies right now is really hard because 'cause I'm like, "God, why didn't I audition for that?" Or like, "God, I'm that type." Or like, "God,
oh
this must have been so fucking fun to make, and I miss working so
oh
fucking
100%.
bad."
I can say that also you I think we've talked about this. You know I love Molly Gordon, who
Mhm.
co-wrote, co-directed, starred in theater camp. I pitched her at one point for Miranda's Victim, and she wasn't
Mm.
available because she was making her director debut with theater camp. I was like, so close. But I think you'd relate to it a lot. And I think
Mhm.
it's that same sort of summer camp feel we're talking about, where they go out there and they're like, we are bonded.
Yeah.
And there's something about like you just being like stuck with someone for a week in the woods, even if it's like there's mess halls and all this other stuff, which there
Mhm.
is at Camp Half Blood. Like they talk about how like they're extended family sort of
Yeah.
for Camp Half Blood, which they loosely say extended family because like there's dating within there, but they're not real family.
Mhm.
It's a whole
They really don't
conversation.
talk
Like
about the incest. Yeah.
no, they talk about it later books down the line, where it's like, oh, Beckendorf from Hephaestus, who like I want you to read the other series at some
Mhm.
point or the rest of the books. We'll
Sure,
see if
yeah.
that happens. But you're like, oh, Beckendorf, love him to death. He's this big burly guy from Hephaestus. Who's he dating? The camp counselor for Aphrodite, and everyone's like, what? It's like they're so cute. They're so
Yeah.
damn cute together. But then it's the whole talk of like, how does that work? It's like your godly side doesn't count because like they talk about it for Athena. She doesn't
Mhm.
actually sleep with them. She
Right.
gets with people who are high intelligence and basically spawns a child.
Mm.
So it's like not really. This is a weird
Mhm.
tangent. Go on, but their
No.
argument is like it's not really like incest or anything like that because
Yeah.
they're not blood family. It's like it, if it was a brother-in-law,
It doesn't count.
basically. It doesn't count. It sounds terrible. It's
Don't
like
worry about it. Don't worry about it.
that must have been their thing because it's like we can't introduce people who are not half bloods for them to date, for them to
Yeah.
have relationships with.
There
So
can't
we're
be
just
like
gonna
townies. Yeah.
they can't make it through the barrier, and if they go out, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's I don't know how we got here, but
Well,
yeah.
I only have a couple other things which are mostly like asides, which is like I love that there is a council of cloven elders. Like
Oh yeah.
I want to see that. Let me in.
Kind of assholes. The
Um.
Council of Cloven, they're all old heads for the most part. I mean, Chiron and Mr. D are part of like the
Mhm.
council technically,
Well, I guess they
but
are elders. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It is in the name, Aaron.
Well, it's the whole idea of like, I mean, and Grover's storyline is so fascinating.
Mhm.
Not to spoil stuff in the long run, but his whole thing is like he said he wants to find Pan, right?
Mhm.
He wants to find Pan because their whole thing is that nature is disappearing
Yeah.
because there's like industrialization, there's more towns coming up. And like as someone who really loves nature and as someone who like feels bad for like all the
Mhm.
destroying of, wilderness and like how much we're expanding, it was wild to see that analogy and that storyline
Yeah.
happen in a modern story. Even if
Mhm.
I read that like what, middle schoolish, so like I read that series like 2009, 2010ish. I was like, man, this is terrible. We need to fix it. And then like here we are tracking Taylor Swift's jet emissions.
Yeah. Yeah. And now she's
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole story. That's a whole. I
That's a
can't
whole
get
thing.
into the Taylor Swift demographics of
Yeah, no.
dating a football player because I have a lot
Yeah,
of thoughts.
no, 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 no.
Really
That's
trying to hit
a
all those quadrants, Taylor. Get back to the original. I was country once, really hitting middle America. I loved the detail of Grover playing So Yesterday on the
yes.
pan flute because I have been blasting that album this month. Loved that, loved that. And the continuing thunderclaps are genuinely very funny. Anytime that's some good comedy there.
I will say there's moments where he'll be like, "Man, Zeus," and then it thunders, and I'm like, "You better watch what you say.
Mm-hmm.
He's watching." And I just imagine because they don't really show it at this
Yeah.
point in the story. I imagine Zeus sitting out there being like, "Better bring me back as a bull." He goes, "I swear to Zeus," and he goes, "Watch it."
Mm-hmm.
Like it's him leaning forward a little bit. Yeah, he's like, "I dare you." No, you're right. That's a great comedic moment. I feel like I have some other ones. Oh, this is a little thing, but I
Mm-hmm.
wrote down chapter 9, the first seaweed brain. It's such an iconic like nickname slash like taunt from
Mm-hmm.
Annabeth to Percy, and it's kind of mean, but at the same time, it's like she is so smart, and he is
Mm-hmm.
technically a child of Poseidon, and there's like
Yeah.
it's a budding rivalry sort of a little bit at this point in the story. So I'm like, I'll take it, but like it as their friendship grows, it kind of
Mm-hmm.
becomes more endearing, and
Yeah.
it was so interesting to see the first time it was utilized.
Yeah. And I think that is interesting to like there's romantic overtones obviously, right? Like that's where the series goes.
Yeah, it's very established in this one that
Mm-hmm.
she has some feelings towards Luke.
Yeah.
And that really was like what he's 17.
Mm-hmm.
He was 17 or 19? I forget what they said his age. But Luke also was with Annabeth and Talia when that first
Right.
thing happened. So like it's a lot of protector vibes and a lot of like
Mm.
Annabeth's been here longer than everyone. And it's sort of like them versus the world for a little bit, but now that Percy's here, she still has like some form of feelings towards Luke, and she's really trying to figure out what those are,
Yeah,
especially with
that's an interesting conflict set up for the second book. Yeah.
yeah, second book, everyone after this of being like, oh, he really was like a day one for her. Like
Mm-hmm.
they went into this together, and now he's bad, but she doesn't share the same viewpoints on him at all. She is very
Mm-hmm.
adamantly against like, no, Cronus is not the answer. So how do you differentiate between your day one like that? Someone who
Yeah.
you may or may not have feelings for, who has in your mind such wrong opinion.
Yeah. And how do you, having shared a past, how do we both go down the same path and yet you end up at a different answer? I think
Mhm.
that must be really, and I think that's also like, that's a great question, especially for childhood and as you're growing older, but I think continues into adulthood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Percy shows up, and it's someone who you butt heads with, but that you do kind of connect
Mm-hmm.
really well with. You see an eye and eye, but then you end up with that kind of triangle, and like how
Yeah.
does that push and pull of like, well, this person's so far away from me now, this one's closer, like not even just like a physical sense, but like a mentality sense.
Yeah.
You're right. I think this is a very interesting place for her to grow from.
The only thing I really haven't touched on is like memorable teachers, like
Oh yeah. I don't think I started reading in her class, but I
mhm,
had this teacher named Mrs. Olson. And a little bit about me, I was tongue-tied as a kid, and
mhm,
you'll still hear me like kind of slur my words sometimes. So I was in speech and like I was speech classes from like kindergarten to third grade because
mhm,
as a kid and it
mhm,
doesn't my tongue is stuck to the bottom of my mouth basically. So fourth grade, I was kind of in the mentality of like, I'll just go through school, whatever. I would go home, I'd play games, I'd read a ton of books. Like I would read
mhm.
all the time. But, like I was kind of doing okay-ish in school, right? They don't really grade you I mean, I don't know how they do it now because I feel like children have it really rough.
Yeah.
But fourth grade, like third grade, fourth grade, before that, it's sort of like, they're satisfactory. And I would
Mhm,
always hit satisfactory. There's no ABCs or whatever until I hit fourth grade, where I was supposed to do a project on Native Americans because Florida, it's a big part of our culture,
mhm.
especially like or where I was in Florida and like Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, all that. I was big into that. So I did it, but I didn't read the project at all. So I did a little diorama on like a game they would play instead of like what their home life was. So they wanted you to draw or like create like little huts. So I got a terrible grade. And basically my parents were like, Brandon, you're not allowed to play games anymore until you fix them. I was like, oh, man, they're like, also, you're only allowed to read like these books or like books that are assigned for class or something. I was like, this is the worst punishment. I can't entertain
Yeah.
myself with games.
That doesn't
I
make
can't.
sense. You're doing poorly in school, so we're gonna take something academic away from you.
Well, it basically was like you can read, but you can only read once your work is done. That was basically it. Where it's like
Hmm.
no more just straight playing and like you can get done. Like you have to get this done. We're cutting out games. You can only read after your homework's done. So I was like, fine. My grades turned 180. I started getting A's on everything. My teacher's like, Brandon, what happened? I'm like, I got in trouble because I wasn't trying. So I had to start actually doing stuff. She's like, you weren't trying? I was like, no, why would I?
Yeah.
Why would I try? So then she had me take like a test, and I ended up getting put as like gifted, which was like
Hmm.
that's a whole different conversation on
Oh
whether or
yeah.
not that was beneficial in the long run. I definitely
Hmm.
think a lot of my mental issues stem from
Oh yeah.
all that,
Gifted
but
4 through 12.
yup,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. But I always loved her because not only did she saw that in me as like something I could do, but she always supported me back when I wasn't trying to. She was so sweet. She's retired now, so I wish her the best. But I'm the oldest of four, which
Right.
we've talked about. But I had her, my sibling underneath me had her, my sibling underneath him had her, and then she retired the year after. And I'm like, man, she could not deal with one more of us, I guess. 3 out of 4, and she was like, I'm done. But whenever I think of Kyron, I really think of like her because she is that teacher who's like made such an impact on me.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, it was my high school art history teacher,
Okay.
and she became my photography teacher the next year. And it was less like I was always very academically motivated because of my family, but her name was Miss Heaton. She's still around. She's on my close friend story. Hey, she might be listening. I don't know. But she like saw I had her class the year after I did my summer college program, which was the moment I realized like, oh, people are friends are supposed to be nice? Question mark. What? So that was a really like weird year for me. And she was the person who sort of said, like, you don't have to take shit. Like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Like, you are allowed to perceive yourself and explore yourself, and other people's opinions are dog shit. And like, she recommended me for this huge scholarship at our college. And like, I think she like made me much more comfortable in myself and comfortable in discovering parts of myself, and that like enthusiasm should not be tamped down in any way, which I think is really funny because she is like seen as a very like stoic, grouchy, kind of hard ass teacher, and yet like really was very like, Aaron, have fun, do whatever, like calm the fuck down.
Oh, I
um
love that.
yeah, love to her. So final question, I guess, do you consider this required reading?
100%.
Yeah.
I think the problem is it's the start of a series.
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but right now it's really hard for me to jump into Brit like series. But I think there's enough of finding your own purpose, enough of like, inclusion, like we talked about, of just, kids being kids and going through tough situations and like feeling that emotion accurately as a kid that like everyone should read at least once.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
I think the original 5 books everyone should read at least once. I
Hmm.
think every book is great, but I do think the arcs that we see are truly great. Like yes, it's YA, and I think
Hmm.
that YA kind of gets a bad nomenclature
Yeah, for sure.
sometimes, depending because of certain series.
Hmm.
I feel like they get looked down on, but I don't think that the message that gets put in them are any less significant.
Yeah.
And, with this book having a series with the original writer having a key part in it
Yeah.
coming out later this year, I think everyone should read it before they watch it
Yeah.
or watch it. I don't know. I think that this world is so fascinating and everyone can learn something.
I think it's really a great book for this was a phrase in research for a different episode, but for reluctant readers, like this is a really good way to start a love of reading and literature and things like that. I think it's extremely accessible, and that voice is like you said, is very true and real.
I like that. Yeah, and it's definitely for reluctant readers because I mean, I think you probably have a lot of friends or a lot of people too who don't read as often
Mm.
anymore. Like it took me a lot to get back into reading just because of how busy life was.
Mm.
You said you read a lot, especially when you were younger, and like I did as well. I have a whole bookcase of stuff next to me, but it's a book like this will get me back
Yeah.
into reading, you know?
Yeah. reading for the last couple of years for me has become like really a balm and something I really enjoy. And especially like at least my like mid city has so many fucking little free libraries like on every other corner. And I am just hoarding books like crazy. And I fucking love it. Like I don't know. I've read like I've stopped using Goodreads and started using this app called Storygraph, and I have read like 70 books this year, including audiobooks, which I love. Like I just finished an audiobook an hour or two ago called Notes on an Execution, which was really good. It's goes through like the 24, 48 hours leading up to a serial killer's execution, you know, on death row. And it works through his life story through the perspectives of women who knew him and interacted with him. It's very, very good.
I mean, that sounds right up your alley, but that also sounds like a lot mentally.
Yeah, it was. But also, yeah, I think it's the same thing that like when we wrote that series in college, true crime was really like beginning as a cultural phenomenon, was like very in vogue. And I think it ends up with the same kind of question of being like, I'm just walking about my day, like doing dishes, walking the dog or whatever, and reading about something really fucking awful. Maybe
Yeah.
there's should be some introspection there. But I think like with that, it was very much about like seeing like the end was very beautiful and that like these women who were victims, the ability to be other things and to be more was taken away from them, and it was it's very well done. But yeah, a little bit much. I'm waiting for they just put out another book in the Wicked series, kind of. There's like the four Wicked books, and then they're like, just kidding, we're gonna have more. And there's a trilogy that came after, and so I'm waiting for that one to be available because it just came out, and
Ah,
I'm ready for
you're
some.
gonna hate me. I've
Yeah.
never read a Wicked book
So they,
or seen
I
the
like,
musical.
yeah. Well, the musical is so different.
That's what I hear, but it's just yeah,
Yeah, the musical is very much like Broadway, trying to hit the four quadrants. And
yeah.
the book, in like the first chapter, there is like incestuous puppet sex. Yeah. So, but like I really love it because I really love The Wizard of Oz. The pacing in those books is fucked. The pacing is bad. There's
Yeah.
in the first book, there's this amazing scene where like the Wicked Witch of the West is a like college age. She is like a modern day terrorist ready to like do some awful like suicide bomb shit.
Jesus
And then
Christ.
the book is like, and then she woke up from a coma 7 years later. And you're like, I want to murder you.
You
Gregory
know how
Maguire,
you know
that's
how we're talking
awful.
about how bad dream sequences are? I
Yeah.
think that's up there too.
Yeah. But then like the book has like really beautiful moments. Like the end of the second book, the end of the fourth book, like gasping, tears, just gorgeous moments. But I love The Wizard of Oz so much that it really resonates. But that's all I got. Anything else to say?
I'm glad that I got you finally read Lightning Thief. I will definitely send you, now that you've read the first book, the musical,
Oh yes.
because it's on Spotify and it's a quick listen. It's not official,
Hmm.
I believe technically, but it's kind of been blessed
Yeah.
by the creator. So
Yeah.
we'll count it. Even if the movie was official, he did come out and say he's never watched it. He goes, "What movie?" Uh,
Jesus.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like now that you've read the book, I want to be like, watch the movie and see how different it is. But like the whole idea is like, oh, there's 12, and like he has to. The main quest is before he turns. They haven't gotten the main quest yet for this, did they? At the end of this book, did they say what the great prophecy was?
Kronos?
Yeah,
I don't
I don't think so. They
know.
talk
I
about
think
that in
it's
the
like
next
alluded
book.
to.
They
Yeah.
allude to it, but basically it's like, 12. The great prophecy is until, this person turns 16. It's like, oh wow, that clock is ticking. And then in the movie they're like, yeah, he's
Boom.
18, he has
Yeah.
until 21. Or he's 16, he has
Oh.
until 21. Everyone's like, wait, but a lot of these moments are because they're so young,
Yeah.
they're stumbling through it, or like these emotions make sense for a 12-year-old but not for a 16,
Yeah.
18-year-old. Yeah. Anyway,
Mhm.
that's all I have to say. I will definitely send you the musical, and I'm glad we did this for required.
Yeah. Do you have anything to plug? Where can people find you? Do you want to be found? You
Oh, do I want to be found? I mean, that is very introspective that I do not know. Yeah, people can find me at, I wish I had a better name for my social. I'm bginch4949 on Instagram. That's really the only place. Or I did just work on a
know?
movie called Miranda's Victim that is on all sorts of video on demand, like iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Prime, and I have a movie hopefully coming out next year-ish that I don't think I can say the name of because I haven't officially been attached to it. So we'll see.
Oh yeah. Thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
of course. You know I'll do anything for you, Barry.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. Join us next week with another SCAD grad, Katie Wilkerson, as we discuss Catcher in the Rye, a book that has been on the list since I started the podcast. You can find me everywhere at Aaron R. Bowles. The R stands for Rut Row. And happy Halloween!